Welcome to episode 36 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. In the last episode of the podcast, we looked back to a European cycle that took place more than a century ago. In this episode of the podcast, we'll look into the future, albeit the very near future. In mid-July, the Dutch cyclist Maike Brinksma will be one of the first people ever to cycle what has been called the Amazon of Europe bike trail that runs beside the Mura, Drava and Danube rivers from Slovenia in the west to Serbia in the east. Maike will be talking about her plans for the trip, which involve more than just cycling from A to B, but she'll also be reflecting upon the life of a cyclist in her home country of the Netherlands. Is it really the cycling nirvana that we all imagine it to be? I think we all know the answer to that question, but I'll be asking it anyway. Our monologue in this episode comes from the poet and writer Caroline Burrows, who will be reading one of her cycling-themed short stories. But before we hear from Maike, just a quick reminder that if you enjoy the Cycling Europe podcast, there are several ways in which you can show your support. You can give the podcast a rating, perhaps even a review on the podcast platform where you're listening. You can help spread the word about the Cycling Europe podcast via social media. You'll find us at Cycling Europe on Twitter and Instagram and at cyclingeurope.org on Facebook. You can also now make a donation to help fund the podcast and the website, and you'll find all the links that will enable you to do that simply and securely at cyclingeurope.org/support. Every donation is very much appreciated and helps make the podcast more sustainable. The podcast is also looking for a sponsor. Could that be the company that you work for or even run? For more information, please get in touch by visiting cyclingeurope.org/contact. And finally, we're always on the lookout for contributors, especially if you'd like to record one of the monologues that we've featured in recent episodes. If you'd like to offer your thoughts about a cycle or a country that you've visited on two wheels, you could be one of the stars of the next episode. All the contact details at cyclingeurope.org/contact. And one last thing, remember that there's a version of this podcast on YouTube that is subtitled. Visit cyclingeurope.org and follow the links to the YouTube channel. So, on with the show. In mid-July, Maike Brinksma will be setting off to cycle the Amazon of Europe bike trail. I started by asking her to introduce herself.
My name is Maike. I live in the Netherlands. I am 26 years old. I recently graduated from my master's degree in a small town called Wageningen. I studied international land and water management. But I'm also a huge outdoor addict, enthusiast, and I love cycling, hiking. I'm now preparing for a cycling trip in the Amazon of Europe.
Yeah, and we're going to come to all that in a second. I just want to delve a bit deeper into, first of all, your academic background. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, I started my bachelor's degree in a different city. I studied geography and mostly social geography, actually. So a big focus on sustainability, on environmental protection, but also on the connection to people. After that, I switched universities and I started the master program International Land and Water Management. And I focused mainly on the water side of this. I specialized in environmental protection, in how rivers mainly could be managed in a way that is inclusive to not only all the big stakeholders like people in the economy or culture, but also the local communities mostly. So I've really tried to take this more people perspective on environmental protection. And now I'm really focusing on the connection between social justice and environmental justice. And that's also what I wrote my final thesis about river protection in Albania. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to really see how people connect to nature and how that shapes them as environmental actors or defenders.
Yeah, and we'll see in a few minutes. This is all directly relevant to your plans for this summer that you're going to talk about in a few minutes. But you're not coming to this in any way, shape or form inexperienced when it comes to active sports. In fact, you're quite a high-level sportswoman. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when I was younger, when I was actually probably 4 years old, I started ice skating, speed skating. Ice skating is a big sport in the Netherlands, so everybody does it. But then I got better and better, and I pursued this speed skating for probably 15 years until I was 20. I trained quite hard almost every day, but with speed skating there's also running, cycling, other kinds of strength exercises. So I learned to push myself a lot, and I really loved it, but at some point it was enough for me to focus on myself so much, because that's of course necessary for being a professional athlete. And then I decided to quit and really start focusing on my studies.
So how good were you? Were you representing the Netherlands? Were you representing your town, your region?
Probably I was the top of the country in my age groups. I was mainly participating in national championships and sometimes representing the Netherlands in international competitions. And I mean, I wasn't on Olympic level, but I was sort of in the teams that with people who were all going or trying to achieve this goal, this big goal of competing at competitions like the Olympics or really big things. So I wasn't there yet, but I was sort of trying to get there.
So again, this ties in with what you're going to be talking about in a few moments. So we've had the academic background. You've got a background in sport, active sport, speed skating, but obviously that involved a lot of cycling. But you're also, I think it's fair to say, you're also quite politically active. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that actually also started a little bit after the speed skating, or already during maybe, when I realized that what I liked most about all this sports was that I got to be outside a lot, but I didn't really have time to really take care of the things around me because I had to I was working on these competitions so often. At the same time, I was already studying, and there I was learning about the threats to the environment and climate change, sustainability issues. And I started to realize that if I want to be outside this much, if I love being in the outdoors so much, then I should really make sure that it is captured and that it is protected. Yeah, so I think really with this education of sustainability and these kinds of things, in combination with my passion to be outside, I realized that I really had to start taking responsibility. So maybe I would call it environmental activism instead of political activism, because I really think that the environment shouldn't be political, even though it is. But I think the environment and the outdoors are really about people connecting to nature, people realizing their connection to nature, and then transforming that into taking care of nature. Yeah, so I think environmental activism or environmental protection maybe is so closely linked to people who want to be in the outdoors. That's what I'm now trying to be more vocal about also.
So there's these three things. There's your academic background, there's your background in sports, and your desire to be active on a political level with climate change and things like that. So can you explain how this all is going to come together this summer with what's called, I haven't heard of this before I first spoke to you, it's called the Amazon of Europe Bike Trail. Can you talk about that, and can you talk about your plans for the summer?
The reason that you haven't heard of this name is that it's quite new. It was recently developed. But yeah, this summer I'm going to cycle the Amazon of Europe Bike Trail. This was developed by WWF in collaboration with many local partners and UNESCO. There has been a nature reserve was created or developed in the way that 13 small nature protection areas were connected into one big area. And this is all located in the Balkans, crossing 5 borders from Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary and Serbia. Yeah, so this nature reserve has been created to protect the ecosystems that are there, mainly connecting to the rivers. There are three really big important rivers there, the Mura, the Drava and the Danube. And to show that these rivers are so important and to show that this biosphere is really important, but also to motivate people to come there and to see how special nature is, the Amazon of Europe bike trail was developed, and that's what I'm going to cycle.
In that area of Europe, the Danube cycle route is part of Eurovelo 6, the one that goes from the west coast of France all the way across to the Black Sea. You've also got the Iron Curtain Trail, which is Eurovelo 12, but this is actually quite distinct. Although it does follow a little bit of the Danube, it kind of is a distinct route that isn't following any of the Eurovelos. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think you could definitely connect it to different routes, which would be really nice. These rivers, the Mura, Drava and Danube, they sort of follow the border between all these countries. So you can either cycle on the north side of the rivers, the biggest part of your trip is Hungary, or you take the south part of the route and then the biggest part of your trip is in Croatia. And then I think as soon as you reach the Danube, you can follow the next trail.
And how long is it?
So if you would do the north and the south, it's about, I think, 1,300 kilometers or so. Quite long, but it's not too crazy. So if you choose one of the routes, it's about 600 to 800 kilometers.
And which of the two have you chosen to do, or are you doing the whole thing?
Yeah, I've decided to do the whole thing so that I'm doing a round tour, actually. So I'm starting to cycle the 6th stage of the south route, then following the route through Croatia to Serbia, and then getting on to the north route, so that I also finish the same location that I start.
Okay, and how long do you think it's going to take you to do the route?
I'm doing this in collaboration with WWF, so I am probably officially I'm the first person to cycle this, so WWF is also using me in a way so that I can take pictures, that I can experience this trip, so that I can also in a way promote this a little bit and make sure that people want to cycle this and see why it's so special. Since I'm doing this together with WWF, I also want to take time to do some educational trails that have been set out in the region. This area is also, it's a biosphere reserve, so it's also about the linkage between local economies, local communities and nature. So I also want to experience these cultural things. So I'm not rushing it. I think I'm going to take about a month or something like that. But I definitely want to make sure that I experience the region, and I also want to take time to do a little bit of research myself, talk to people, connect to people, and also explore my own connection to these rivers.
It's a new route. There is actually quite a bit of information about it online. There's the website, which is aoebiketrail.com. That's Amazon of Europe biketrail.com, AOE. Do you know whether it's signposted?
Yeah, this is actually something I'm still quite curious about. I'm expecting that parts of it will be signposted. I think the goal is to have it signposted, but it isn't yet. So I think I will mainly follow the map. But then again, I'm following 3 rivers, so I'm hoping that I can just see the river and follow it east or west.
Well, yeah, that's the best thing about following a river, isn't it? The fact that, there are two good things about following rivers. One is that, quite frankly, if you get lost, then it's entirely your own fault, and you probably shouldn't be on a bike cycling anywhere. And secondly, the fact is it's usually quite flat, obviously, because you're following the course of a river, and unless you get to a horrendously big waterfall, it's usually quite flat. So, it should be good. You've explained that one of the reasons why the route has been developed is in order to develop the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. I've never heard of a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Do they exist elsewhere? Is this the first one? What is a Biosphere Reserve?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure if there is other biosphere reserves. I think so. I do know that this is the first one that's also crossing borders, trying to combine different nature protection areas. And a biosphere reserve is basically about how nature could be managed. It's also an interdisciplinary approach to understand and also to work on the interactions between the people living there and the ecosystems. So this is combining multiple protected areas, mainly to protect the biological biodiversity, forests, rivers, floodplains, river banks, but also trying to stimulate the local economy and protecting cultural heritage. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's other, I think so. UNESCO is trying to achieve sustainability, environmental protection, but also more than that, also focusing on gender equality or on social injustices. So trying to reach beyond only protecting nature.
What are the environmental challenges for the Mura, Drava and Danube? What are the main threats to their environmental protection?
Well, one really important threat is that there's a lot of hydropower development happening currently. Besides pollution, that's also, of course, really important, also affecting access to drinking water, but also affecting the ecosystems. But right now there's actually a boom going on in the Balkans regarding hydropower development. They're all quite small, the ones that are being developed. And normally hydropower is seen as green energy, sustainable energy. So also the first time I learned about hydropower, I saw it as this green solution to climate change challenges. But then I started looking into this, and actually it's not that energy efficient and it's not that great for the environment. It's actually really bad. It's also not so nice for local communities living there, as they don't really have access to the energy produced there. And there's also a lot of corruption often involved in hydropower development processes, as you can get subsidies for developing these dams as it is renewable. Yeah, so it's also really related to bigger societal challenges in these countries, which makes it really interesting, I think, to focus on the protection of rivers, because you can see this link between human rights actually and protecting the river so clearly. But yeah, if you're talking about what the environmental challenges are, there's fish disappearing, the water level is dropping, it's not safe anymore when there's suddenly a flood, forests are being deforested. So yeah, there's a lot of issues going on. But I'm expecting that here, because it's 13 nature protection areas connected, I think it's still quite wild or quite healthy. And of course, it's important to conserve that.
You said you're going to be working, or rather cycling, in collaboration with WWF, that's the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Practically, what does that mean? How will that affect your cycle? What will you be doing on a day-to-day basis, which connects with the work of the WWF?
Well, firstly, the most important thing is that during the cycling, I will collect material that WWF can use to show what this area looks like. So I will take pictures, make videos. I will also write about my experiences there. So I guess that's some sort of promotional activity. And on the day that I start cycling, there will be a small festival in the city where people can cycle with me. So it's also a way to promote sustainable travel, cycling as a mode of transport, because it's not that big in these countries that I'm cycling through, and of course in the Netherlands it's huge, cycling. So it's also a way for WWF to show that this is also a way to travel, but also a destination to travel, rather than flying to the actual Amazon, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go to the European Amazon rather than the real Amazon, which is far better for the environment. Again, on a practical level, what's your style of cycle touring? Are you going to be staying in hotels, in hostels with people? Are you going to be camping? Are you going to be carrying all your cooking equipment? How do you envisage that side of things will work out?
Yeah, this is going to be a challenge, I think, for me, because what I would do if I wouldn't do this in collaboration with WWF is probably push myself a little bit too hard, just go camping, maybe go wild camping or camping on campsites if it's possible, and probably, I don't know, forget to drink or something. Sometimes that happens, but now that I'm doing this with WWF and also for the protection of nature, I don't feel comfortable wild camping because I think it's important to not affect nature in that way. This Amazon of Europe bike trail also is created in collaboration with local people, local accommodations. I'm not sure whether that's hotels or I don't know what I should imagine with these accommodations, but I definitely think I can make use of some of those or pitch my tent next to them, as it's also an opportunity for them, I think, to show what they have. But I think it's going to be a real day-to-day adventure, and I will probably call someone in the morning and say, "Hi, do you have a place for me to pitch my tent, or do you have a bed?" I'm also sort of hoping that sometimes people will invite me for dinner, for example. Yeah, in previous cycling trips, that sometimes just happens. I think people are always really welcoming when it comes to cyclists. You can never really count on that, but I don't want to plan too much so that I can still experience all these random encounters. I will bring my tent because I love camping and I would like to make use of my tent.
That's a really interesting point you make about the wild camping. I'm terrible at wild camping. I think I've done it once. But there are other people who do it all the time. But it's interesting that you consider the fact that it does have an environmental impact to pitch your tent really in what you perceive to be a wild place. Can you explain that in more detail?
I think you can definitely do wild camping without having a real impact on the environment. But I do also think that it's important that there is nature that remains untouched, and also that during the night it's quiet so that the birds or insects or animals can just go and do their thing. If you're conscious of how you could potentially impact the environment and you're trying to reduce your impact, I think it could be fine. But I do think it's important to critically think of, is this a good place to camp or to pitch my tent? Is it a good place to cook, to make a fire? What do I leave behind, of course? Nothing, hopefully. It didn't really come to my mind at first that it's maybe not the best thing you can do in a natural environment or in a protected area. But then if you imagine that everyone cycling there pitches their tent, then it becomes a big festival location. So I think that's also important to consider, to see how many other people are around, things like that.
Yeah, I think you make some really interesting points there. I think I know that the one place in Britain where people are allowed to legally wild camp throughout the country with certain restrictions is in Scotland. And I know that obviously with people staying in the country due to the COVID crisis last year, there were issues up in Scotland of people just kind of turning up and making a real mess, destroying the pristine environment in which they decided to stick their tent and cook, and then they left rubbish behind. And you do need to, it's not the easy option by any stretch of the imagination. You do need to think about what the impact is on the environment. And it's not just the obvious things. It is like the disturbance of wildlife. Are you stopping an animal doing something that perhaps it would naturally do simply because your tent or your fire happens to be in a particular place in the countryside? So an interesting, that's interesting. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and then it feels as if you're in nature, it feels sustainable, you feel connected to nature. But I think that's also where it becomes really important to realize that what you're doing is only possible because it was protected or because it was conserved in a good way. And if everybody would do that, your really beautiful camp spot would probably not even exist. So I think that's important to realize that as cyclists or as hikers, that what you love doing also depends on how you do it.
And the other thing that you can't really do if you're wild camping, especially if you're travelling by yourself and you want to not have a great big mass of people in a kind of festival kind of situation, is meet people. And one of the key aims of your particular cycle this summer is to collect stories from local people and also, I think, fellow travellers. Can you talk about that, and how do you envisage doing that? Will you be recording them? Will you be writing it down?
I'm hoping to learn about how people in that area connect to the river, also how they think the river is and what the function of the river is, how they think about this biosphere reserve, if they think it's good or if they're critical about it, how they participate in environmental protection themselves maybe, because I would really like to learn more about this human-nature connection. So I'm planning on bringing my recorder, like audio recorder, and talk to people about these things. Maybe take a couple of questions with me that I will ask everyone, or not everyone that I meet, but people I meet. Also, it would be interesting to talk about the role of outdoor people as environmental agents. So talking to other people I meet on bikes maybe, or people walking in the area. Yeah, so I hope to cover these topics and to learn more about this, because when I wrote my thesis, actually, it was similar questions. I was exploring this human-nature connection, but because of Corona, I couldn't travel to those areas. So I did my whole fieldwork online. So I do also see this as an opportunity to learn these skills, to talk to strangers about these quite difficult topics, sometimes even topics that they might not want to talk about or haven't thought about, and then to collect stories that I can share. Yeah, so to see the importance of the people there.
And you mentioned your academic research there. Do you think what you're going to do this summer, do you think it will be useful to further your academic studies? Will you be continuing to study water management when you return back to the Netherlands later in the year?
I'm not sure if I will use it for more academic research. I applied to a PhD recently, also about rivers, maybe for that. But I also really see the importance of good science communication, and I think this podcast, for example, is a way of communicating knowledge or experience. And I see research and academics as a way to collect a lot of knowledge, but I think there's still a big challenge to also share that knowledge. And I would really like to come up with different ways, more creative ways to share what I learned, to share this research that I'm gonna do. So maybe writing more readable articles than what you would find on Google Scholar or other academic sources. Maybe writing stories for children, or making a fun video, taking pictures, making an online exhibition. I don't know. Many ideas, but I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I definitely want to push myself a little bit to do this, to take that step.
I don't think it's a case of arguably, because I think it's fairly obvious that the impact of a piece of academic research is probably relatively limited in terms of getting it to people who actually matter when it comes to improving the environment and making sure that they don't damage the environment. People like travellers, people like local residents, they don't read academic research, but they do read books, they do go on the internet, they do listen to podcasts. So that kind of thing is probably a far more effective way of getting your message across.
Yeah, and also in the production of knowledge, I think it's important to be critical of academics. I think it's an important way to collect data or collect stories, but it's important to know your own role as a researcher, and also that it's difficult to hear voices from different cultures, communities, or different kinds of knowledge. Right now there's also a whole discussion, for example, about rights of nature. There's also a movement in the world, in New Zealand, in Ecuador, in different countries, that rivers, for example, should have human rights or rights of being an entity. And that, of course, doesn't really comply with the knowledge that we have in academics that a river is a source of water. It has all these more biologic ecosystem services, but in different cultures people approach rivers in a totally different way, and I think those ways and those knowledges are also important to consider. And I think that's where stories come in, and talking to people, and to take a step back as a researcher and to let other people talk.
We'll hear more from Maike in a few minutes. Caroline Burrows is a Scottish poet and writer who is now based in Bristol. She previously appeared in episode 13 of the podcast in the innocent pre-COVID days of February 2020. Back then she read a poem about cycling in the footsteps of fellow poet Wilfred Owen. In this episode of the podcast, she reflects on what she sees when she cycles to work in a short story called False Flat.
My name's Caroline Burrows. I also write under the name Verse Cycle, and this monologue's a short piece loosely based on a commute I used to do to work. It's called False Flat. The bike's cassette whirs, a soft sound overwhelmed by the roar from the acceleration of a certain type of engine. I tense automatically. Past it goes, too fast, too close, shiny silver hubcaps in the badge of proof, blue and white checks in a circle. Another big massive wheel sucker getting all proprietary on the road. The whisper of my bike reassures me. I loosen my grip and click down the gears, click, 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 until there are none left as I climb the hill, pushing down on the pedals I'm clipped into. I imagine I'm scraping gum off the soles of my shoes on the pull-up for maximum power. I read that somewhere once. Good advice. It's harder to climb well when it's like this. Doubtful I'll get a personal best today. Something to do with cold air irritating the lungs. My panting now dominates, bellowing out of me in white puffs. This hill's a real chest buster. Coffee's in the air. I can almost taste it on my tongue with my mouth gaping open from this effort. I know I'm on time because I recognise a man with wild grey hair sitting outside a cafe up ahead opposite my office, where the hill levels out into a false flat. He's bundled up in layers, all shades of grey matching the tarmac and pavement. He drags on a thin roll-up, a stream of smoke accompanied by a hacking cough on his exhale. The closer I get, the fag smoke corrupts the scent of caffeine. I've been noticing its absence when he isn't there, which is more often than not recently. He lifts a porcelain mug to his mouth, a patchy beard clinging to his sunken cheeks. Does he set his clock by my gasping too? Does the smell of my sweat wafting over him ruin his coffee? I draw level, him huddled over his hot drink, me hunched over my bike. It's like some odd parallel universe, almost as if we're sitting together. I wheeze past the grubby rucksack dumped on the pavement, his stained sleeping bag spilling out of it, and keep pedalling as the incline kicks up again with a kilometre to go. I crest the top of the hill. It's not a personal best. Try again tomorrow. I make a U-turn that cars can't get away with, not even BMWs, and freewheel back down to the office, my daily dose of exercise all too quickly done. I lock my bike up and go over to the cafe. He's not there anymore. Never is by the time I get back. He's been replaced by a new man in shades of grey. But this one's well turned out, in a wool coat paired with a scarf neatly knotted, clean shaven, ready to take on the day. He gives my typed cycling thermals an appreciative once-over with a small nod. A few minutes can make all the difference to a daily routine. It's doubtful he's aware of who is sitting there just before him. The porcelain coffee cup's the same, but the roll-up's now a perfect-looking cigarette. A pack of Marlboro Red is placed proudly on the table beside a set of keys. The fob displaying what type of car he drives, which I could have guessed. He blows his cigarette smoke in my direction like it's a slow breeze. I wrinkle my nose at the chemical smell and push the cafe's door open into a wall of warmth. I order my usual, a latte to take away and a coffee for someone who's homeless, please. And then I go back out into the cold, cross back over the road and go to work. My name's Caroline Burrows. I write under the name Verse Cycle, and you can find me on all the social medias at Verse Cycle, Verse for poetry and Cycle for bicycle. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Now back to Maike. As we heard earlier in the podcast, this summer she plans to cycle the Amazon of Europe bike trail, but she's also keen to be a role model for fellow female travellers. I asked her what she sees are the extra challenges faced by women on such journeys and how her cycle can help inspire other women to set off on similar rides.
The biggest challenge of doing a cycling trip, probably not only as a woman but also just in general, is to start doing it and to decide that you're going to do it and to make the decision that you're going to do it alone. And often when I say that I'm going to do this cycling trip, people are like, oh, who's coming with you? Is your boyfriend coming, or are people joining you? And I don't know what I can expect in terms of how safe I will feel or unsafe. I'm hoping that I will feel safe the entire time, and I want to show that your challenge doesn't need to be the biggest or the craziest, but it just needs to be a challenge for yourself. And I want to show that you can do that day by day. You don't have to already know what you're going to do every single day and where you're going to sleep every single day, but you can ask for help. I'm hoping to show that these countries are safe, that it is safe to talk to people, but I also want to show that I can fix my bike, or I want to learn how to fix everything on my bike, because probably everything will break, and I know quite some things, but I don't know everything. And I think often when you ask something technical about a bike, people start talking to the guy that's maybe around you, next to you. Yeah, and I also want to show people that I can also do that. I can also challenge myself physically and mentally, but I also want to show that it doesn't always need to be a really big challenge.
Yeah, I think again you make some really interesting points there, and that question that people will automatically pose if you're a man and you say, oh, I'm going to set off on a long journey, I'm doing it by myself, they will potentially be seen as a positive thing. Hey, this is somebody who's a real adventurer, somebody who's willing to go out there and, conquer the world almost. But from the perspective of a woman, if a woman says that, very often it's seen in negative terms as, oh, are you sure you want to do that? You're not doing it with somebody else? They see the potential pitfalls, the potential problems that a woman could have. But quite frankly, the problems that a woman travelling alone can have are very often the same problems that a man could have travelling alone.
Yeah, I think so. I think you always have to be smart if you're a guy, and also if you're a girl, if you're a man or if you're a woman, you just have to be smart about your choices. And I think that's also a reason why I don't feel 100% comfortable wild camping, for example. But that doesn't limit my trip. I just make different choices, and I wish it was possible to wild camp everywhere, but there is a risk, and I have to be honest about that. But there are also risks for men, of course. But I think you're right. It's often the assumption that it's often men doing these kinds of things. Also, just road biking or sports in general, of course, is a real man world. And I think there's definitely a change happening. And you see many women on bikes, and running and in doing crazy things. But it's always that people, they look up and they don't assume it as normal. And I wish it was just normal that I would do this alone.
Yeah, I agree completely. You mentioned your bike. What kind of bike is it? I'm going to talk in stereotypes now, but I can imagine the typical Dutch sit-up and beg, we call them, bikes, with a basket on the front.
Oh, my bike.
What kind of bike are you going to be riding?
I'm either, I haven't decided actually, I'm either going to take more like a touring bike, maybe a little bit more towards racing kind of bike, or I'm taking my road bike, race bike, so like a fast one, and then doing more bike packing on my bike. I'm gonna take the bike packing bags, but I will need gravel tires more than race road tires. I think since I'm also trying to challenge myself, not to challenge myself too much physically, I think I'm gonna go for the touring bike so that I am a little bit slower, so that I can look around myself, look around me a little bit more.
Take the one which is slower, because all the things that you want to do, all the people that you want to meet, all the experiences that you want to have, the photographs, the videos, they'll all be far better if you take a slower bike. So do not take your racing bike.
No, I'm already worried that I'm then fast enough, or I don't know. I'm already worried about those things.
Do you think that might be actually an issue, the fact that you come from a background of competitive sport? So when you're left to your own devices, do you think that sometimes there might be an issue with you just setting off and thinking, right, okay, today I need to get to 100 kilometres, come what may, rather than making the decision to say, no, today I'm going to do 20 kilometres because there's something interesting. That person I want to meet is over there. I'm going to take my time.
It's funny because when I used to do ice skating, I wasn't that competitive, or at least not in the way that I was comparing myself to my competitors. And I think that's what I now experience in long distance cycling. Yeah, I'm competing against myself. I want to feel tired afterwards, after a day of cycling, so that I feel satisfied. But I definitely want to learn this trip also that I can feel that after 20 kilometers, for example. Yeah, I think that is probably left of my speed skating times, that you learn to always want to do better than last time, and you learn to physically challenge yourself in the way that it's more a mental challenge. And that's also what's so nice about cycling. I think that you really have to set your mind to something, but at the same time really be in the moment, look around, enjoy where you are. But still, it's not always fun, it's not always comfortable, and you have to get through those moments in a positive way. And I don't want to see it as some sort of competition. I just want to enjoy every single meter, and that's what I normally do. But still, it often feels better when you're tired.
Yeah, I agree. You're looking for Goldilocks cycling, aren't you? Cycling that's not too hard, but not too easy, not too fast, but not too slow, not too exhausting, but then again, not too easy that you don't fall asleep in the evening and you feel as though you haven't deserved your beer in the evening when you get to your destination, that kind of thing. So yeah, you're aiming for Goldilocks cycling. Hopefully you'll find it. Do you have much experience of doing similar trips in the past? Have you cycled much in the Netherlands or in other places in Europe or even the world?
I've cycled a lot in the Netherlands, just like every day to and from different places, but also some cycling holidays, longer distance cycling trips. I've also done a couple of trips, mostly in Europe, longer trips, never longer than a month or so. I think this is actually going to be the longest trip that I've done on a bike. I've done longer hiking trips, so I'm also curious to see how much my butt will hurt.
Where have you cycled in Europe?
I've done, for example, last year I cycled through Germany from Berlin to the Netherlands in a couple of days. There's really great cycling in Belgium as well. In Norway I did some cycling. I also really like cycling in France and of course in the Alps. That's just amazing. And then there's all the hiking possibilities in Europe. There's long distance trails in the Netherlands that I've recently discovered and done. And there's loads.
I think you're the first ever, I'm trying to think, in 36 episodes, I might be wrong, but I think you might be the first Dutch person that's appeared on the podcast. Perhaps somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't remember immediately anybody else who came from the Netherlands. So I've got to ask you a question or two about being a Dutch person and being a cyclist, because from the perspective of Britain and probably most of the places in Europe, we kind of, we look up to the Netherlands, especially in terms of the cycling. We see on the news and in the newspapers when you spend 40 million euros on a bicycle car park in your cities, and we think, wow, that will never happen in Britain, and it probably never will. From your perspective as a Dutch cyclist, in fact, do the Dutch even bother to call themselves cyclists? Do you consider yourself to be a cyclist if you simply spend a lot of your time on a bike, going to and from work, to the shops, to the school? Are you cyclists, or are you just being Dutch?
I would say we're Dutch. Here in the Netherlands, your bike is kind of like your legs or your car, I guess. Yeah, you use it to get anywhere. If you want to walk, you could walk, but you'll probably take your bike and cycle there. Everyone has a bike. I think everybody has probably 2 bikes. And then the people who have 3 bikes, they call themselves cyclists.
So you've got to have 3 bikes to be called a cyclist. Interesting. Yeah. It can't be simply, again, the Netherlands is famous for being flat, but I can't imagine that is the only reason why the Dutch have embraced cycling in such a positive way. Do you think it's in the Dutch psyche? Do you think it's the way that you think? Do you think you've got a government who's just simply willing to fork out the cash to build cycling routes and things like that, cycling infrastructure that we don't have elsewhere?
Yeah, I think a big reason is that the Netherlands is so densely populated that there's really no space for cars, and people don't like the space that there is for cars. I think there's many people who love their car and use it a lot, but in general, cars aren't really appreciated in cities. And I think it was in like the 60s or the 70s that bigger cities were trying to develop highways to and from cities, big roads through cities, and that also caused a lot of accidents, but also a lot of protests, and people felt more fragmented, and they started protesting against these bigger roads and against all the cars that came, and eventually though they won, and that's when bigger cities started investing in good cycling roads rather than roads for cars. So I think that's definitely a reason why this all happened, and ever since it's just really in our DNA. When you're 2 years old, 3 years old or so, you learn to cycle. Everybody does. It is like walking here. It also really connects people. Everybody knows that you can get to your friends by bike. It's a way to connect. It's culture here. It's also really safe. There's a lot of good cycling roads, traffic lights, and it works. People have respect for bikes, I think, more than in other countries. When I cycle in other countries, I feel less safe than I do here. And I think that's definitely true. Everybody also has bike education here. At some point in your high school, you have to do some sort of test to show that you can do it. That you know that you have to show where you're indicating where you're going. But yeah, it's part of us.
And when you have the majority of the population, the vast majority of the population at some point cycling, that also means that when you're in your car, you have in the back of your mind the experience of being a cyclist. I think I am a better driver because I am a cyclist. And in a country like the Netherlands, where you have so many cyclists, that can only be a good thing for general safety as a cyclist on the road.
Yeah, you always know, when you're in a car, you always know there might be a cyclist around you. And most often the cyclists do not really respect the cars, so they can really be anywhere.
Do you have any groups in the Netherlands? We have lots of groups here. For example, taxi drivers famously are very, especially in big cities like London, they are quite vocal about their dislike for the investment that goes into cycling and cyclists just generally. Do you have those kind of people in the Netherlands, or is it seen in the same way that very few people here criticise our National Health Service for the job that it does? They might criticise the government for not giving it enough money, but they won't criticise the health service. Is cycling a bit like that in the Netherlands? Is it kind of beyond criticism?
I haven't heard of much criticism regarding developing new cycling roads or better cycling roads. There is a bit of a hate towards road biking, like the fast race biking, because they sometimes come in really big groups. I sort of get it. It is kind of scary. Now everybody has the experience of being a cyclist, so you would never protest against a cycling lane, I think.
Yeah, I find it quite, every time I see on the newspaper or in the cycling magazines or something that the Dutch have produced some fantastic bit of cycling infrastructure. It might be there's that float, is it called the floating bridge, the circular bridge somewhere? It's beautiful and it's phenomenally expensive. And I just look at it and I kind of weep with tears of envy that we don't have things in Britain like that. But I can just imagine some of the newspapers, if the government decided to spend that kind of money on a bridge for cyclists, there would be riots in the street, I think, because of the way in which some people perceive that being in inverted commas, a waste of money. Obviously, from a cyclist perspective, it's not. So I think, one day perhaps we'll get to the point of where you are in the Netherlands, but I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, it's nice. It's. I think it's also a way of attracting people to come to cities, because it feels, of course, a lot more pleasant when there's fewer cars and, not necessarily more cyclists, but just fewer cars, I think, in big cities. Even if you're not the biggest cycling addict and you like your car a lot, I think you still like that the city feels a bit more calm because there's not that many cars.
Yeah, and I think people erroneously think that the solution to the car problem is, electric cars and autonomous cars, but at the end of the day, they're still cars. They still
and bigger roads.
They still take up a heck of a lot of space, and they can still kill or injure a cyclist or a pedestrian very, very easily.
Yeah, and in the Netherlands, I think it's also in the law that if there's an accident between a car and a cyclist, the car automatically is more to blame. And I think that's a way of showing that cycling is almost like a right, safe cycling.
I think you've persuaded me to move to the Netherlands. Go. If only Brexit hadn't happened, I think I would be there on the next train or the next boat. But anyway, I think what you're doing this summer sounds fascinating. I think basically this is going to be the first of two conversations that we have, hopefully, because I'd love to have a chat with you again when you return from the cycle along the Amazon of Europe bike trail. And also, I think it would be really interesting to listen to perhaps some of the recordings that you make, your discussions, your chats with people that you meet along the way. So do you think that would be possible?
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be really fun to have another chat. Also for myself to reflect back on what I thought before. It's always good to do that. And I'll make some recordings and bring them.
Okay, excellent. Well, this has been a really nice chat, both informative and really, quite a fun, entertaining chat with somebody who lives in a country that I am deeply envious of on a cycling level. So thank you for that, and good luck. When do you actually set off, by the way?
I set off on the 11th of July.
And will you be blogging? Will you be using social media? Can people follow you?
I will post a story of what I experience every day. Like I will write something or take some pictures, and that will be posted on the Amazon of Europe Facebook. And I will probably update my personal Instagram a little bit. I'm not so active, but I at least want to have some sort of a link to a blog that I will keep. So that's where you can also find it. Because I am planning to make some sort of journal of recordings of pictures, of videos, to make sure that I have something to use if I want to communicate about this, and if I want to continue a little bit of research about this.
As I said, good luck with the trip, and hopefully we'll hear from you again later in the year once you've returned from the Amazon of Europe.
Yeah, thank you so much for the chat. I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Thanks to both Maike and Caroline for their participation in this episode of the podcast. Maike's cycle will take her along a short section of the Danube, and we have breaking Danube news. Shuffle of paper. Lawrence Warren, who provided the monologue for episode 34 of the podcast about cycling in Austria, the country where he now lives, has just sent me a follow-up email, and he says the following. We have just returned from a tour around Austria's northern border with the Czech Republic, including sections of the Iron Curtain Trail and ending up riding towards home along the Danube, that's Eurovelo 6. In my monologue, that's Lawrence's monologue, I said the Danube route is extremely busy, but this year things are very quiet. Hotels are empty and there are few people riding. It's a good year for touring Europe if COVID gives people the opportunity. Thanks for that, Lawrence. Let's hope that COVID doesn't cause too many issues for Maike when she sets off later in July. That's all from episode 36 of the Cycling Europe podcast, but remember that you can show your support by rating or reviewing the podcast, sharing information about the podcast on social media, making a donation to help fund the podcast by visiting cyclingeurope.org/support, perhaps sponsoring the podcast, or even contributing a monologue yourself. All the contact details at cyclingeurope.org/contact. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and happy cycling.